Hey there, welcome to the Offset Podcast, and today we're taking a look at a viewer-submitted question about trends in current looks. Stay tuned.
This podcast is sponsored by Flanders Scientific, leaders in color-accurate display solutions for professional video. Whether you're a colorist, an editor, a DIT, or a broadcast engineer, Flanders Scientific has a professional display solution to meet your needs. Learn more at flandersscientific.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another installment of the Offset Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Robbie Carmen, and with me, as always, is Joey Dana. Hey Joey, how are you?
Hey everyone.
Hey, so Joey, as we have mentioned a couple times in previous episodes, we do take viewer or user or listener, however you want to phrase it, submissions. You can head over to theoffsetpodcast.com, and at the very top of that page, there is a button that will bring you to a form to submit your own idea. So if you haven't been over there before, we encourage you to check that out and to submit an idea if you have a topic that you'd like us to explore on a future episode of the Offset Podcast. And it just so happens that today we are doing that. We are discussing a viewer submitted question. This one comes from John. Joey, why don't you tell us about John's question and what it's all about?
Yeah, so our topic for today comes from John, and he's asking us to talk about kind of where we've come from in terms of color palettes and styles and where we are now. You know, what is currently popular? Where do we think things are going? What's happening across different genres? Essentially talking about both, you know, styles and trends, because those are very, very relevant to what we do. And it's actually something I've been thinking a lot about somewhat recently as we've been exploring some of the, you know, everybody knows we just had a real bulk of beautiful new film emulation tools released from various vendors. And as we've been exploring some of those, it's kind of gotten me thinking about what are the trending looks, what looks good, what doesn't look good, what things used to look like versus what they look like now. So it's a really good topic for us to discuss, especially in light of kind of all these new features getting to us in terms of software. So yeah, I'd love to dive into that.
It's a good topic. I mean, I think that this is, you know, it's always a hard one to kind of be, completist on or totally accurate because, the idea of trends is that they've already been established and people are looking at them and following along. Meanwhile, there is, a colorist and a DP or a director in some dark room somewhere coming up with something completely new and different, right? I mean, so every time I think of trends, I naturally kind of because of my music background, I kind of naturally gravitate towards that kind of same, trends in music styles, right? And you might have like, this genre or this kind of production technique is popular or whatever. But then next thing you know, somebody comes out with something you've never heard before and it's mind blowing because it's like, oh my God, this is crazy. And I think, in our industry, it's definitely it's a little bit of a copycat industry, right? People, trying to follow the trends. Oh, I want this look. I want that look. Did you see that movie? And we've talked about this in various ways in past episodes, right? We've talked about references. We've talked about look setting sessions, these tangential things that are kind of related to this. I would just put a big asterisk before we dive in. I would put a big asterisk by saying all of this, by saying that, the best looking projects are the ones that the look matches the project, right? And that might be bits, parts that you've borrowed and grafted on from trends and looks, but it might be trying something completely crazy and different and, throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. And maybe it does for that particular project. So I would just warn our listeners and viewers that, trends are cool. They're good to know. It's almost a requirement to know about them to put in your toolkit. But at the same time, and we've discussed this in various ways over various episodes, you don't want to be just a straight copycat, right? People are hiring you to bring your opinions, your feelings. And the reality of it is that, take whatever look du jour might be popular out there. It's oftentimes hard to graft that 100% to your particular project, right? And so you can be influenced, that's the way I like to think about it, by current trends and looks. But I think there is danger in straight up copying looks.
Yeah. And, another part of his question was, what is popular now? So
Yeah,
let's
sure.
start with that because I think there's a very, very clear answer to this. Whether you look at kind of prestige films, ads, prestige TV, what is
Yep.
popular right now, without any shadow of a doubt in my mind, is a soft shadows film print low dynamic range look. And what I
Yep.
mean by that is a couple of things. I mean, usually the black levels are just
Floaty.
above zero, right? We're never really hitting true black. So we're getting a lot
Yep.
of shadow detail, which is
Yep.
nice, especially with modern televisions being able to show so much shadow detail. Then, color wise, we're usually somewhat desaturated and we're pushing volumetric changes to be kind of not having a full gamut of color. What I mean by that is there's a lot of tealish blues, so where everything from magenta to green is pushing a little bit towards teal. And if you kind of take the
Yep.
other side of the vector scope, you're pushing a little bit towards a pretty yellowish red. Very, very reminiscent of printed film projection. And when I say low dynamic range, I don't mean low contrast. I mean, we're not in HDR projects or even SDR projects really hitting high
Yeah.
brightness values. I think there's a lot of, kind of medium to lower dynamic range stuff happening these days that in general looks really pretty. We've made no secret of the fact that we love this look. We love print emulation. We usually don't like super clipped highlights or super clipped shadows, right? I love teal in anything,
You
like
do.
teal blues. I love yellow. For a while it was the quote teal and orange, but to me it's kind of the yellow and green axis. But it's the
No.
same idea, right? We're
Yeah.
volumetrically compressing the gamut to look more like what a lot of film prints looked like. You're not seeing a
Well,
lot of true magentas, for
yeah.
example,
I
in
so
current
I
media.
I agree with the general sentiment that the idea of emulation, lo-fi is another kind of phrase that comes to mind when I think about kind of these popular looks. And it's funny, we were earlier this summer, we were you and I were both along with some colleagues, we were at in Beijing at BIRTV, which is a big conference, doing some presentations for our sponsor. Thanks, big shout out to Flanders Scientific, doing some education classes for our sponsor FSI and their manufacturing partner Zunzheng. And it's funny because and we'll get to this in a little bit about different markets and different locales and stuff with how they feel about this stuff. But I'm sure you felt some of this a little bit too in your sessions, right? That I was doing things, film emulation things, grunging things up, giving texture, etc. And it was like the general feeling was like, why are you degrading the image? Right? Like,
Yeah.
why are you making this worse? And I'm like, oh man. So I mean, I do think that there is a certain love affair with lo-fi throwback, whatever. I mean, and you see this a lot. You even see this in framing, right? People doing a lot of things that 4:3 type looks, or not even you know I've even
Any kind
seen
of
some,
weird aspect ratio.
yeah,
And
weird
I
aspect ratios. I've even seen people, like, honestly, like, not de-squeeze properly anamorphic footage because they're like, oh cool, look, it gives everybody this tall skinny look, we like it. I'm like,
now,
geez,
can I mention one thing here related that I
sure,
am gonna get crucified for?
sure.
But I firmly believe it. Some of the top Hollywood directors, the greatest films made in the past 30 years, are doing this thing now that I think is utterly stupid and I wish they wouldn't do. And I understand why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I understand that it can be a cool thing, right? But the variability or expanding in and out of aspect ratios, where like we go from a widescreen 16:9 and then, oh, we're going to bring it up. So now it's a more 4:3 IMAX ratio when it's bigger. Like, to me, I know I know why they're doing it, because maybe they might not
Yeah.
want to film an entire thing in IMAX and 4:3,
Yeah.
or they have a lot of different markets to get to. And I know it's more complicated than kind of what I'm reducing it to. I hate the trend of switching aspect ratio mid film unless
Dude, the
there's
other night, the other
something for it.
motivating.
Like if you're cutting
Yeah, yeah.
into a television screen from the 60s, yeah, you're going to go to 4:3 because that's
Right.
what it was, right?
Sure.
But like, it takes me out of the film when I'm like, oh, did you see the letterbox
Well,
move?
yeah, I agree. I think that's some of that stuff's a little cliche, a little campy. But I mean, I think when I think about the current, kind of state of, Saw, I think there's also, like, to use some color words, I think that there's, there's a push towards some sort of pastel-y, kind of more muted, like they're still saturated but they're just softer colors, right? Like, and
Yeah.
I think you pointed that out with some of the sky stuff. I see that also even with just like things that traditionally have been pretty bold, right? Like reds and yellows and stuff like that. They're just a little bit more muted, they're a little softer, going along with the contrast. And I think when I think about this kind of current state of affairs of the emulation kind of look, the printy type of look, I think it's more of an evolution rather than a revolution. I mean, I think for we joke, but 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was, log glove, right? Where everybody was shooting with, oh, for the first time we were using, cameras that, did log encoding. People would fall in love with it during the offline and then be like, yep, no, we just want it flat. We just don't want any contrast in it. And like, this feels like a little better than that, but kind of an extension of that. We don't like, somehow, some way, I feel like contrast, especially coming, like, I think it's largely a reaction to some of the things that we saw in the 90s and early 2000s. Music videos come to mind. Michael Bay comes to mind, who is one of Joey's, by the way, Joey's like intellectual filmmaking
Yeah, that's next on my little list of things to talk about, the 90s. So
Joey is an expert in the 90s, by the way, just FYI. But I think that, a lot of that, so we saw heavy, deep contrast. I'm thinking like one of the classic, even going further back than that. I rewatched the other day. I watched because my son had never seen it. I rewatched the original Top Gun, and I mean, it's awesome, right? But like that opening scene on the aircraft carrier, I don't remember it being as crunchy and as deep and as crushed as it was, and like the film grain just being like over the top. Like it was like kind of nasty, like dirty. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love it, but I think that we saw this progression from deep, heavy contrast, strong highlights, and to be fair, a lot of that was because the process of what we do was very basic, very limited. I mean, we're talking about, basically TBCs on a tape deck, or we're talking about simple, one light kind of things on a telecine, right? It wasn't until later.
So to get where you need for the bulk of the image, you might have to sacrifice shadows or highlights.
Right.
We don't necessarily need to make those sacrifices anymore.
Right. And there wasn't a lot of control. A lot of that was just decided in camera, and then it is, hey, that's what we shot. Cool, let's roll with it. And I get that. But I think that kind of extended out until, years later, mid 2000s, extended out to the popularity of the log look. And now what I look at it as just like an evolution of, okay, so we went heavy, we went really super light, and now this kind of printy, slightly degraded, texturized kind of look it's ever so popular is largely a reaction coming out of those two trends, right? And these are probably 10 year so trends, and I like it. However, I want to stand on and die on a hill for one thing. I live my life in fear of contrast now, and I really hate it. I really hate it because it's like, I know that when I get to that point where I'm like, this is bold, deep, and punchy, I know somebody's going to say something about it, right? And it's just like, so much of the discussion and feedback and stuff we have back and forth with clients has nothing to do with shot to shot continuity, has nothing to do with skin tone or other details. It's like the discussion seems to always revolve around contrast, right? And it just, I don't know.
Gun shy now.
Yeah, I think people have gotten afraid of contrast a little bit and pushing it in there.
All right, so I'm going to talk about two things, both related to contrast. One, you mentioned the log look. This, I think, is an example of a trend that was without redemption. There was nothing good about it. It was horrible. It was a dark age for what we do. It was accidental. It was a technical error in that a lot of workflows hadn't figured out digital cinema yet.
I don't want to interrupt.
Looking at log images and falling in love with them.
I want to interrupt for 1 second because I had somebody say something to me the other day that I loved, and they because we have said it probably about 500 times over the course of this series of podcasts. We have often said respect the photography, and I had somebody go, "What's more respectful of the photography than log?" I was like,
Yeah, no. Like, no, 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 no. So, we've heard of happy accidents. The
yeah,
log look trend was a very unhappy
yeah, I
accident.
agree, I agree.
But as I mentioned, this is something we've talked about this. This is
Yeah,
something I've been thinking about creatively for a long time, and I haven't found the right project to really dial it in. And I want to explore it more in my projects, kind of to get out of that lower contrast film printy kind of trendy look. Is from the mid to late 90s and the early 2000s, as I like to think of it, the peak of humanity.
yeah.
It's kind of all been downhill from there. All of the best movies and shows and everything happened right around 1995, 1996. Look up IMDb for 1995 and 1996 and look at all the movies.
There,
It's all the
there-
best movies in history came
there's some
out in like
bangers
a
for sure.
3-year period.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's some bangers.
And
Yeah,
along that time period, we had, as you mentioned, a huge cultural shift in terms of music videos coming to the forefront, which
yep,
brought us really innovative directors because
yep.
there's a lot less risk in doing something wild for a 3-minute music video than there is doing
Yeah,
something
because it's
wild for
they're
$100 million
artists. It's outside of the box. Yeah, totally. All the
right?
things all the stripes you could put to it. Yeah.
Same thing with some of the TV at the time. So three examples I want to bring up just to look at and think, okay, there's aspects of this look that we don't see anywhere on TV now that I'd like to bring back. Uh, Music videos from the 90s and 2000s, like I said, huge contrast, almost to a fault. I would like to
Yeah.
see and explore getting back into the weeds with the dark blacks, but maybe let's skip the clipped saturated highlights video-y look right now, right? Maybe we can not have that part of it, but get back to those deep, deep, deep blacks. Examples to look at. This one, anybody who's watched it is going to crack up when I even mention this because it is early 2000s, like 2002 fever dream buddy cop TV series that only lasted one season. That is basically every episode is a hour long or TV hour long music video with these crazy looks. And it was, God, you're going to laugh. Do you remember Fastlane?
I
It
don't.
was like a buddy cop show where the premise is like, we confiscated a bunch of fast cars from drug dealers. Now we're going to do cool cop shit with them.
It's right,
And
right up,
it
right
was,
up your alley.
oh, yeah. It was conceived and directed essentially by music video directors from the era. And it is, there's not a good transfer of it available.
Was this like this is like precursor to like Fast and Furious type looks? Is that where you're going
Yes. And hold on. I said three things. We're getting there.
with?
But yes, and it is, yes, there's tons of clipped highlights, but there's
Yeah.
deep shadows, and like you mentioned with the first Top Gun, there's something that you see in a lot of 90s music videos, a lot of early 2000s music videos that we don't see anymore, which is incredibly dramatic tinted scenes like that
Oh
opening
yeah,
sequence, right? It's completely yellow. It's like
dude.
they went into the RGB mixer and just said, we're only doing yellow today.
You know, I
You
make
saw
fun of
that
you a lot.
with
I make fun
blues
of
and
you a lot.
reds in certain scenes.
Yeah. I make fun of you a lot for some of the 90s love, but I will, and especially the idol worship that is the Michael Bay shrine that you have on the other side of your room there.
Yeah.
But I will say that one thing I love from that era is I do love the tinting. I love, like, I watched the other night, it was just on TV. I watched Bad Boys, which is another great example of this, right?
Classic.
Where it's just like, you have this, this sky, and it's like straight up like purple. Like, I loved the early days of Top Gear, right? Where they're
Yep.
like, hey, it's England. It's a flat gray sky. We got to do something to make it exciting. Let's just make it neon orange because that's reality, right? And it's just like I loved those kind of looks. But you said I want you to continue on. But you said one thing that I want to just clarify, because I do think that it's an interesting segue. Yeah, I think you're right largely about the 90s contrast, like the difference between black and white. I think that kind of thing, we're saying like, oh, it's all about printy and flat and pastel, whatever. I will argue that shows like Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, some of these shows like what's that one, Glow, that we really like from Anne Vortevek. There's a couple ones like that. I think there are big budget television series that have explored dark and deep very well.
Yeah.
I think the problem with them though is it's not, or not the problem, but the disconnect is that it's not necessarily contrast. It's a lot of deep dark, which I think a lot of places have explored really well over the past decade. But that pushes back, that's all sorts of viewer problems, right? We've in the Game of Thrones one probably being the most famous, but they've done a lot of really good things, deep and dark, which I think is different from what you're saying of like
100%.
the whole huge contrast ratio.
Yeah, all of these examples from the early 2000s and 90s, basically, you look at them on a waveform.
Yeah,
It's
white's
cut.
here, black's here, right? Exactly.
There are massive swaths of shadow detail that are just gone. Do I want to go back to that? Probably not. Do I think it's worth looking at those trendy stuff from 90s music videos and kind of incorporating more aggressive contrast into some grades for the right project? Yes. Next example, I want to talk, and the cool thing about all these things from the 90s and 2000s, they were all film originated. We talk about film look, but film can look like anything. Film can look like a 90s fever dream, or it can look like Game of Thrones. It doesn't, there's no rule, right? So another like early 2000s kind of prestige TV that I think is really emblematic of that look that I'm kind of longing for, the short-lived but masterful James Cameron attempt into sci-fi television that was Dark Angel.
Oh, that was a pretty good one. I was just, before you
Very
said that,
deep shadows, but with a much better technical execution where the exposure was perfect, the photography was beautiful, but it still had that more aggressive contrast look.
Yeah, there's two that pop to mind that are in that similar vein for me, and it was both series that I loved. I was a big fan of the sci-fi series Fringe, which was kind of like an X-Files typey kind of thing. I loved Fringe. That had a lot of like those kind of deep kind of looks, a lot of wacky things going on. They did a lot of cool things with topography and all that kind of stuff too. The other one that I really liked that I thought was bold like that was Sherlock too. The Benjamin Cumberbatch installment of that, which I thought was really good. I mean, I don't think there's always been outliers to these trends and to these looks, but I mean, I think what I hear, and to answer John's kind of question, I think that, color correction and color grading has always been about incorporating inspiration, incorporating, things and feels. So I think that what we're currently seeing is a little bit of contrast sphere, a wanting, sort of an extension of that log kind of thing. But I do think that some of the things that we're longing for, those 90s, 2000s looks, I do think in small part, parts of them are coming back in some separation. And clearly, I think that we're like, as you said just a moment ago, that film can be everything, with the bulk of so much work being done with film emulation techniques, stock emulation, grain, halation, all of this kind of thing. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that people will start doing throwback to 60s, 70s, 80s film. I mean, like, I was watching a couple weeks ago, because this time of year, as you get closer to the holidays, right, you get these movie marathons, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, The Godfather, or whatever. Just turn on TNT or TBS on a Saturday, and you're bound to find one of those series. And I was watching The Godfather the other day, and I was like, man, a lot of this film is deep, dark, hard to see into the shadows, kind of crushed. And that's obviously a film originated film. And so I do think that we're gonna reach a soft landing spot with this over the next kind of couple years, where I think that
just in time for the next trend to
right.
completely
And I
change
think
it up again.
I guess what my point is that it's not a if then or that or
Yeah.
binary thing. It's more of a library, right? It's more of like, okay, we
Yeah.
like this kind of thing. It exists on a range. So yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we're going to see undoubtedly is somebody somewhere in some genre breaking the mold of all of this. It always happens, right? It's always we get into a trend and we get into a vibe, and then somebody comes out and everybody's like, oh my god, mind blown. And I do think that there are some gatekeepers of this. I mean, obviously, I think there's a lot of famous directors on this, like the one that at the one end of the spectrum, right? I think about Wes Anderson all the time, and like if you watch a Wes Anderson film, they're just crazy in the way that they look, right? But they're also awesome. And I think that there are plenty of directors like Wes Anderson or whatever who are pushing the boundaries with these kind of things and clearly not following trends. And that would be my advice to John, is to be inspired by trends, but not to
Yeah.
necessarily follow trends. Because I think that anytime that you're in a copycat situation, you're not pushing ground yourself.
Yeah, kind of to sum up my view on it and to answer the core question of, you know, current trends, definitely that kind of print look that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Current inspirations, the best executions of anything in that ecosystem. You mentioned Stranger Things, love that. And of course, I've talked about it a million times on this podcast and everywhere else. In terms of HDR, beautiful grades, my benchmark is still Glow. Absolutely. Just
Love Glow.
I cannot say how much I love the way that show looked enough.
I mean, I mean, we've said this before, but the man crush on Ian's work is very heavy. Tales from the Loop that he did on Amazon was another one where I just think he's so. I mean, I don't know the principal. Obviously, we weren't privy to the principal photography, but based on the look that he developed along with the creative production team, that's another one where I just think that like he gets it. He takes bits and parts of things that he and the rest of the creative teams like, and he's able to very masterfully graft those bits together. Which
and in a consistent, beautiful way that just puts you into the world, but with the feeling of this fantasy, right?
Right, like if you really watch those shows, you're able to pick out bits and pieces and parts that you could point and be like, oh, this is that. Oh, this is that. But it's on aggregate, like the combination of those things that I think, why we admire his work in particular so much is that like he's able to stitch it together. And there are other people like that. I mean, I think, comes to mind like Joseph Bicknell at Company 3. Tom Poole obviously is another master of this. So, yeah, I mean, I just think that the best, if I could sum up that string of that stream of consciousness there, I just think that some of the best productions, the best artists, etc., are doing this. They're very knowledgeable about the history of film and TV, and they're able to pick bits and pieces from inspiration, from references, etc., and build those together to something that's new, different, and cohesive versus a straight copy of something that's already been done. And I think that's why personally I've come to respect, those are just a couple of the folks, that I come to mind, but like in particular I've come to respect those folks' work because every time I see them, every new project, I'm just like, wow, this is beautiful. Like, I'll give you one case in point, and you have to go back and look at this. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. I'll put it in the show notes. I'll find a link to it. But there was an Amazon Christmas ad that Tom Poole graded a couple years ago that I don't know how to even describe it. It was just like the most perfect thing I've ever watched in my life. And when I went back and looked at it time and time again, he was able to just incorporate so many pieces of famous photography and famous, and again, it's not all Tom, right? That's production, the gaffers, the set designers, all of I get that. But I'm just saying, like, in general, when I look at pieces like that and some of the work that he's done, Ian's done, Joseph's done, all these people, it just they show a nod towards the trends and the history, but also the ability to reimagine what all of those things mean, which is, I think, is absolute the sweet spot, and is clear. It's clear proof why those people and others like them at the top of their game.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of, we are knowledgeable of the trends of the past and the trends of today. I'm going to take that and make something cohesive that is also creative and new and unique and appropriate to the film, not just, today we're doing teal and orange because that's cool,
Totally. Totally.
So to sum up, the last part of John's question was, what is influencing you now? I would say I am kind of desperately looking for the right project to bring some of the higher contrast 90s music video action movie style into, but modified with more detail and less clipped highlights. I feel like we've kind of lost that really punchy, as you said, Michael Bay / Fast and Furious / Stuff I Love look. And it's funny, if you go back and you watch Seven Fast, Seven Furious, at the very end, they do a beautiful tribute to Paul Walker, who had passed before that movie was finished. And they go through really nicely scanned shots and moments from every movie beforehand. And they didn't do like cleanup work to make the grain match. They didn't like try to make it contiguous. Like that little like minute long section of that movie is a 20-year timeline of high-end Hollywood film looks.
It's funny that you say that, because I had a very I'm not a diehard Fast and Furious fan like you are. I've seen a couple of them, but they did something very similar in I think it's supposed to be the last one, the last Mission Impossible Tom Cruise thing, where they went through. I mean, I think that was also 7 or 8 films, something like that, and kind of like these montages of Tom and his team or whatever, the characters in the movie over the years, and you look at some of it, and it's wild to see just side by side the evolution of how that has, from crunchy, deep, grainy to now super high resolution, very clear. Like it's wild how this trends. And again, they were hip, they were cool, they were the thing at that time, and how they developed, which is wild.
Yeah. So, no right answer to any of this, but it's great to explore all of these different things and then kind of use that as inspiration to come up with something, like I said, unique that also fits with the project and the vision.
Very cool. Well, good discussion, John. Hopefully this helped you out a little bit. Not sure. It's always hard to tell on these users or viewer submitted questions if we're actually answering the question or not. But hopefully you get a little bit out of our take on this. Just as a reminder, you can always find show notes or our library of episodes by heading over to theoffsetpodcast.com. You can follow us on all major streaming platforms, as well as YouTube if you're watching there. And of course, if you do like the show, we'd really appreciate it if you'd consider supporting the show by heading over to this link here to buy us a cup of virtual coffee. Every bit goes a long way into producing these shows. And Joey, I think in our next installment, in another 2 weeks or so, I think we should do another one of these. These are fun. We have a little bit of a backlog of these episodes to do. So I think our next episode will also answer or discuss another user or viewer submitted question. So we will go from there. So for the Old Offset Podcast, I'm Robbie Carmen.
I'm Joey Deanna, and I live my life a quarter mile at a time. Thanks for listening.